Innovation and creativity are central to entrepreneurship. But what happens when you go beyond the edge? The Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast brings you the world's first, the disruptive, the avant-garde. We take you to the frontier in conversation with the entrepreneurs who are the forerunners of the industries of the future. Get to know their world with co-hosts Braden, Kemp, and Tracy Morningstar. The dairy industry is in the process of digital and technological transformation. Cows are lining up at robotic milking stations, and farmers are pulling out their phones and checking their dashboards. But not all sensors and software are actually integrated with each other. Not all systems are taking advantage of advancements in artificial intelligence. Is there a comprehensive platform for the dairy farms of the future? Today, we take you to the agricultural frontier with Dr. Shari, CEO of CATTLEytics.
Shari, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Tracy.
Today, Shari came to us with an engineering background, is now a veterinarian. Shari, how did that happen? How is it affecting your creativity mindset?
Thanks, Tracy. I think the creativity piece is what you pulled out of that, which I really like. I was always interested in making things, creating things, and I went into engineering because I liked making stuff, and it's making stuff, pairing that up with solving problems. So going into veterinary medicine, focusing on large animal medicine, I just took that whole mindset with me of how do we take a look at some of these really complex systems from a technical, from a biological viewpoint, and how do we address some of the biggest problems from a point of understanding. So the engineering piece just absolutely potentiates what I'm able to do. I wouldn't have thought necessarily there's such a connection, but it just allows us to not have that disconnect between kind of having a problem, having a solution, and then throwing it over the wall to somebody else to build it. It allows all of our solutions to be really integrative.
While in school, you mentioned that within your third, fourth year, you started CATTLEytics, and you had this moment where you said, we can use data to help inform the process. And that was sort of the light bulb moment that you had.
Yeah, so even before I went to vet school, when I was still working as an engineer, I was spending about a day a week with a large animal vet, going out and going to dairy farms and really seeing whether or not this change made sense, because it's a big deal to suddenly change your career sort of mid-stride. And when I was working with the different dairy farmers, as I got to know them, I said, well, can I take a look at your data? And I started doing on their data the same type of processing I was doing when I was working in the nuclear industry, where you're looking at being predictive about when something's going to go wrong. You can sort of see the telling signs and avoid that versus being reactive all the time. And so as I was meeting with different dairy farmers, I could take their data, put it into a model, and then in general, you could model pretty closely what would happen on their dairy, how much milk they would make, when they would have a greater chance of things like infection. And with one of the farmers, I was doing this, and I was like, okay, yeah, we're within about 3% of what I'd expect. And then I looked at, I was doing this in the spring, and then I looked at their data in the fall, in October, and I said, wait a second, like this model is going off the rails. Like what I thought they would do, they produced way less milk, and it was sudden. And I went to one of this dairy farmer, and I said, what happened in October? Like, why would October be a bad month? It's not too hot. It's not too cold. You didn't make a lot of changes. And I said, about 2 years before, the same thing happened in October. There was this drop. And he looked at the dates I was showing him, and then it hit him. What he'd done is he changed over the feed to be from the feed that was stable and fermented the right way to what you call green corn silage, which is feed that's only started to ferment and it's not very palatable. So the cows had suddenly a different food, and it didn't taste good. They didn't want to eat it, and their milk dropped. And he said, I should have waited a couple weeks in order to feed it to them when it was, sort of edible. But I thought I would save more money by not going in and buying feed. And when I showed him the amounts that he lost in milk profit, it was like, we're talking like $30,000. It suddenly makes that decision make a bit more sense. But if you're not looking at the models and the systems, then you're making that decision to, give them food that's not very, very good, knowing that there will be a problem, but you don't know how big the problem is. And when you're able to quantify some of those things, then you're able to make a much better decision and say, I'm going to make the decision that's not only best for my cows, it's also best for my checkbook.
That's something we see in other areas of ag as well, with farmers, making the best decisions that they can sort of by feel. Mm-hmm. And probably because that's the way that it has been done for generations. And a lot of the time, I bet they're really good at it. But is that something that you've seen in dairy farming where, the farmers maybe aren't relying on the data or just don't have access to it? And so those sort of decisions are being made as best they can, and you can optimize it with your technology?
Yeah, I mean, so, like you talked about making decisions by feel, and often you make very good decisions by feel because you have that sense of when you're in a system so long, when I do this, I do this. But part of it is the making decisions. The other part of it is just having that be at top of mind. So if you're talking about your own life and you actually want to get better at something, then if you don't necessarily know where you are today, and you don't necessarily have that, have it queued up in your daily life to say, this is something I want to do and I want to get better at this, then you won't do it. Let me give you an example. If you want to play the guitar and your guitar is way at the back of your garage, which is not a good place to store a guitar, but then you probably won't play it. So part of it is being front of mind to say, these are being intentional, but these are my priorities on a dairy. I want to get better at this. I want to do this, right? And having those numbers be available, but then also the data as well, making having a full system worth of data. Because what you'll find is, some of the work we just did on something called a voluntary waiting period, when you see the numbers in a really small finite space, it's going to bring you to one decision. But when you see it across your whole system, it'll take you to a second decision. So you need the numbers, you need them, you need information in front of you, but you also need to have it within that full system. That could mean, what are the effects of the animals, not just this lactation, but the next lactation and the next lactation? What are the effects on how much they eat and the cost of that? It's really integrated, and it's very difficult to just kind of gut feel all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we should step back a little here before we get too into it. The CATTLEytics website talks about leveraging digital twins and advanced data modeling. Can you kind of explain these concepts for us and for the listeners and how they're applied in what you do?
Yeah, sure. I think we're familiar with systems like, you go into a grocery store and that there's a technological system that keeps track of the inventory and the prices and all that sort of stuff. And so at a dairy, there are systems already that do that sort of thing. They tend to be, a lot of the systems that are being used today were written many decades ago. But when you have a system that simply keeps track of one individual thing like inventory and prices and doesn't necessarily reflect all of the different elements in that system, you're not going to have a fully integrated system. So in our system, we have a twin of every concept on a dairy. If you have staff, we have staff in our system, and we understand that they have roles. They have, there's experiences that they will have that might make them more appropriate to do certain things. We have the cows as, as objects that have, all of the different pieces associated with them that you see in real life. We have photos of them. We have very almost like three-dimensional descriptions of them. So not just of themselves, but how they tie into the whole system, how they tie into their cohort, how much milk are they making compared to all the other animals that are comparable. So every piece on the dairy is not only represented, but then the relationships between those pieces are represented that way.
And how do you take that concept when you bang on the door at a dairy farm and turn it into something that gets the attention of the farmer?
So the concept of a digital twin, and probably the way I explained it to you, might not necessarily say like connect with the dairy farmer where he's I need that. But I think the places where we connect are when they see that they have a problem that nobody's solving. So for instance, we have a dairy farmer that we're working with who was saying that he connects with all of the staff using WhatsApp. And so he'll put a message on there and say, these hutches need to be bedded. I see this piece of equipment out here. This fence is broken. And this was going on a WhatsApp message, right? And the concept behind there is that you have people that are objects sending messages to each other. You have this sort of like web of connection. But what was happening is you just have this WhatsApp message and you have messages coming in being lost. At the end of the day, he was going through and saying, okay, well, did they do this? And then the annoyance of having to like scroll up and see, okay, when did I ask that? Who actually said this? Okay, did they actually do it? Okay, I'm going to call them. Oh, no, they didn't, but they thought so-and-so did. And it just became a big mess. So at the end of the day, he was spending probably an hour a day just cleaning it all up, right? Finding out, did they actually do it? Doing the tasks that weren't done. So what we did is we created a really integrated task manager. He now goes into the app, puts in the task, and can assign it to a person or anybody who's working on the dairy can like pick off those tasks. It's really clear when they're done. It's communicated on a digital whiteboard that's mounted in their break room, like a kiosk. And it takes that concept that was already happening and was happening in a really messy way and cleans it up. So it's just a simple list of tasks. You're working there. You see exactly what has to be done. You're done your milking. You have a bit of time. You're not stuck saying, okay, well, I don't know what to do next. You can pick up your phone, see it, and when they're done, you just swipe. Super simple, super easy, but it twins the thing that's happening in real life.
Interesting. It seems like broad applications in a whole bunch of industries.
Yeah, you're probably right there.
The way I'm sort of thinking about things is that you have the cattle owners who have been in business for a very long time and find that they become experts, obviously, because they're also passionate about it. And then you bring in the analytics of it, which is just another tool to the toolkit of taking care of the cattle. Sometimes you get a little bit of pushback. Are you seeing real successes?
Well, Tracy, it's interesting you say that because in some ways, I don't try to bring them into my sphere. In a lot of ways, I try to go into their sphere and spend time with them. And in that example, that was through talking and watching and seeing, and then twinning the processes up with something that was really simple, really straightforward, and really targeted to what they were already doing. So I think if I go in and tell somebody how to do their business, I don't know. I don't like that. But if somebody's watching me do something and saying, okay, I see that thing you're doing every day. If I could save you 15 minutes on that, would that be helpful? Yeah, I hate doing that thing. Yeah, help me out with that. So I think a lot of the dairy farmers we work with are honestly some of the most incredible, smart, innovative, understanding, hardworking people out there. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing what I do, is because I get to come alongside these individuals, look at what they're doing today, and then say, I can make that a little bit easier. So another example is our staff scheduler. Most of the dairies still have a calendar with all their staff written on there. And then when they need to change their schedules, they take a picture of it and they send it out to the person. They're using technology, but just not technology well, and not in the way that makes sense. So as part of our app, we not only have all the tasks they have to do, we also have their shifts, like when they have to show up. So they don't need to necessarily drive into the dairy to see that physical piece of paper. So I'm not coming to them and saying this is the way to do things. Like, I'm saying, like, I want to go into your sphere and understand how to do that better, because you're already doing it. Let's just, again, that's the digital twin. Let's just create the system that takes the things you're already doing first as the guide and just create more of a structure to make that easier.
Absolutely. And I think what you're building essentially is a community.
That is so important because we're integrating with other people's great ideas, right? We're only getting stronger as that mesh becomes stronger too, and that's the place where, as we take all of these ideas, all these concepts, all this really positive energy, and build something together that helps us do what we're doing in a better, more connected way, that's when we're doing well. I think the big thing is, though, that we aren't technology first, right? We're very people first. We're animals first. We're environment first. Understand those systems, have those lead the way, and then have technology play second fiddle to that to just support what's happening there.
Shari, I want to jump back a little bit, just because you mentioned meeting the farmers where they're at and versus trying to bring them into your world. Is there a consulting component to this as well, or is it just a pure technology sale?
There's definitely a consulting component. I find that, so we're working right now with some of the biggest dairies on the planet. And I find that when we end up working with them, they're interested in us really getting in and solving some of the problems that they don't necessarily either have the tooling or necessarily the data modeling piece to understand. They know the questions they want to answer, but putting all the pieces in a row, you just can't expect every, dairy farm to necessarily have all of those components to make that happen. So in that world, we're definitely doing what I'd say consulting, but we can do that because of our tooling first. So we can get all the data into a place where we can make use of it, and then we can start to ask these complex questions. Like, what would it look like if we made this, nutritional decision versus that nutritional decision? What are the effects of some of the genetics we chose on the incidence of these different diseases? And those are things that you need a really good data set to get the answers to, but then you need the knowledge of the diseases as well as the tools like machine learning. We use machine learning, we use AI to be able to get to those answers faster.
You mentioned a big dairy. What does that operation look like? What's a big dairy operation?
So big, I mean, the dairies that we work at with that are larger, we're talking like over 6,000 head, over 40,000 head.
Wow.
And so they're definitely exciting, because when you have dairies that are that large, you can really get some great insights into some of the effects of things like lameness or mastitis. And a lot of these things have an impact on animal health. If you can show in dollars and cents why decreasing a certain disease can actually increase your bottom line, that's great, right? It's great for animal welfare. It's great for economics. The other thing is that when we talk about things like methane or, carbon emissions, most often and there's some papers on this, when economics are maximized, carbon emissions are also minimized. So when you're able to take feed and really efficiently turn it into milk, that makes great sense economically, but it also decreases the resources needed, and it decreases the amount of time you have animals that aren't producing milk that are emitting methane. So these efficiencies have multiple layers to them.
Interesting. You also mentioned animal welfare there. How does the technology address that? And is that kind of a core focus of your business model, the animal welfare piece?
Well, as I say, I mean, we're looking at all aspects of these systems. Like, we want to also, we also prioritize things like the people working at dairies. How do we make sure that they know what to do, when to do it, that they're not necessarily being pushed to the limits, and the same goes for animals. So we're looking at all elements of the system and how to optimize their experiences, as far as cows having this symbiotic relationship with humans. When it comes to animal welfare, when you're thinking about things like antibiotic usage, you often have this difficult situation when it comes to cattle. I go to sometimes restaurant chains that have a big stamp that says antibiotic free. And as a vet, that doesn't actually give me warm fuzzies, because I think there's a lot of animals that potentially need antibiotics that, if they're not receiving it, you start to have a welfare issue. So that doesn't necessarily mean that animal is getting the best care possible. At the same point in time, if antibiotics are used, without any sort of judgment, then they stop being effective. You end up with other secondary diseases. So really, a lot of these things, when you say, is it all about animal welfare? Is it all about it? I find a lot of these things are this balance of, how do we make sure that our animals are able to express their natural behaviors, live in a place where there's no fear, they have what they need. But at the same point in time, in the case of antibiotics, if you just use them across the chart, that's when you start to get into trouble. So it's really balancing how all of those different systems interact.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say, when I see a antibiotic-free marketing, it doesn't give me the warm fuzzies, because I think we've probably been conditioned by someone or some marketing effort to just see, antibiotic free, that must be better, right? Because antibiotics are bad, and obviously that's not the case. But it's interesting to see that marketing message in the marketplace.
Well, and how easy it is to see it, to say, well, somebody's stamping this on. And if you say, this animal was treated with a judicious use of antibiotics, it doesn't quite have the same thing to it. But that's what you really hope. As a human, I hope if I'm really sick and I really need antibiotics, somebody won't come up to me and say, well, maybe it's not good for the planet. I don't know. Like, maybe you can die. I mean, it's really for so many of these things. And that's why we need more people who know how to use these things in the system, right? That's why we need to get all of the numbers tied to when it's best to use antibiotics and when it's not. And we can't do that unless we have the data around these systems. So in some of the work we're doing, we're able to take a look at what was the outcome when antibiotics were used, what was the outcome when it wasn't. And if the outcomes are the same, then maybe you shouldn't be using them, right? But we can't do that unless you see the whole system. And as intuitive as dairy farmers might be, that's very difficult to do when they might treat, one animal a year for a specific condition.
Yeah, interesting. Balance. As usual, balance seems to be the key.
Can you talk a little bit about your team and how the varied backgrounds contribute to the success of CATTLEytics?
Yeah, our team is fantastic. We have really a special group of people who have experience in animal agriculture. a lot of them have, 20, 30 years tied to animal agriculture as well as technology. So that's one of our strengths, is to have a group of people who understand both sides, who have been physically in these places, solving problems on the ground. If you're talking about something like a beef operation, it's not unless you've been out in Alberta at minus, 30, trying to deal with a certain drug that is too cold to actually be able to operate because it's not viscous enough. You don't understand the problems until you're out there yourself. And so I think that's what we would do with our team. We're always looking for people who are, potentially children of dairy farmers or connected in some way, but also interested in technology to join our team. And that's what we really want to do, is continue to make a path for people who have this type of mindset, that they have job opportunities to be able to contribute, to be able to add to it. And I mean, we had 5 students over the summer as part of our team, and it brought such energy. They were so enthusiastic about the problems they were solving. One of them was making visual representations of complex bovine family trees. So you could see the whole genetics tied to animals, and then overlaying it with colors in order to indicate, which side of the family tree potentially had problems with lameness and which side had problems with mastitis. So you could actually sort of light up the tree based on whether or not they had issues tied to these things. And then when you're choosing sires for the next breeding, you can potentially keep that in mind. So, I mean, I think we're just, not only is our team enthusiastic, as we bring more people on board, they're just bringing more ideas and being able to implement them.
It sounds like the opportunities, or the sort of the potential scope of solutions you could create with this data and this intelligence is extremely broad. So how do you kind of narrow down on that key value creator?
Yeah. So first off, right now, we have, as you were saying at the beginning, some of our solutions could be applied to a broad range of industries, not just dairy. But we're keeping ourselves focused on dairy right now for part of that reason. The other thing is that when we have that as our template of our digital twin, that everything on a dairy farm we represent, that also creates a boundary around what we're representing. And then as far as the problems we're solving, some of the problems I mentioned, like the task manager, the shift scheduler, those were definitely through our experiences with saying, okay, this is our full system. This is all the things we can do. Where are your biggest pain points right now? And then they were indicating what their top priorities were, in that they didn't need a better solution because they had a solution in some areas, but some areas they just didn't really have a working solution. So then taking a look at that, there's that strategic component to say, there's 50,000 things we could do, but right now these three things are sucking up your time during the day, and we're seeing that repeated. So when I talk about the task manager, that integrated system that all the staff has, we quantified how much that's saving them a month. And it was, in labor costs, it was $6,000 a month.
Wow.
That's $72,000 a year. So when we're looking at our prioritizations of things, that just becomes a natural priority, because staffing communications was the thing that was costing the most. And then, some answering some of these problems, yeah, they're going to have impact, and they may even have more impact as time goes on, but they're not so front and center.
Interesting.
And I think we can all empathize with that in our daily life. There's some of us that have, if we look at our day, we spend a long time commuting, or we spend, like everybody has different places where their daily experience isn't what they want it to be. How do we take that and make that into something that's good? And when you know what a good day looks like in your life, and you can create good days for people working on a dairy farm. So their good day now is that they actually get everything done that they needed to do. They can go home and they know that their farm is better than it was the day before.
That's a great insight.
Yes. Thank you for joining us today, Shari, for another excellent episode of the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast. Great discussion.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you guys.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Delia, powered by Inventure, offers $15,000 loans to qualifying women-owned businesses across Canada at competitive rates. Head to nventure.ca for more information and to apply today.
We return to the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast with co-hosts Braden Kemp and Tracy Morningstar.
The one thing that stuck with me was with Shari was that aha moment that she had. We can use data to help inform the process.
Yeah, it's really interesting and I think really powerful when you have someone with a strong technical background, also with a passion for the industry or sector that they're approaching with a startup idea, because you kind of have that analytical problem solving nature from the start. And we saw it in Shari today. As a general rule, approaching entrepreneurship to solve a problem really seems to be the path to success. And Shari's creativity and technical background seems to enable her to do that.
Mixing those two things together with people that have been in the field for so long, they have such a great understanding already, but bringing that extra component, finding some real solutions.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, that applies here for sure.
I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank our guest, Dr. Shari Vanderpoel. Thank you, Braden.
Thanks, Tracy.
See you next time on the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast.
Next time on the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast, we head to the hinterland of innovation with Advanced Agriscience, a company specialized in enhanced biological inputs for climate resilience. Check out our conversation with founder and CEO, Dr. Colin Giraco. This edition of the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast was made possible with the support of FedDev Ontario and the Government of Canada. The executive producer is Robert Washburn. I'm John Hayden. To find out more, head to our website, nventure.ca. Thanks for listening.